mic on. That'd probably help. So if you want to turn, because you can't see the screen, you turn to Numbers chapter 12, and I'll try to give you the verses as we move along in the study. I'm going to do it a little bit different tonight, and I'm not going to give you the topic right offhand. So I'm going to wait a little while till I give you the topic, and I'll talk about that here in a moment, the reason for that. Again, we're looking at kind of a two-part, I guess you'd say a two-part study. We began talking about how to kill a church, but we don't want to focus on that. We want to focus on how to build a church. So we want to stay in the positive side. So, we're going to look at kind of both sides of it. So there's not just how to kill a church, if my clicker will work. Let's see. It's not wanting to work for whatever reason. Hey, Brother Nathan, the bigger thing that's in that USB port, if you just unplug it and plug it back in. See if I can get this thing to work. Hey Matt, take that thing that's in that little piece that's in the USB port. Yeah, try to plug it back in. Maybe. All right, there we go. All right. So, I'm sorry. We're going to talk about how to build a church. That's what we want to focus on, because we don't want to stay in the negative. We want to know what we need to do to be on the positive side of it. So, we're covering both sides, because if we see the negative symptoms in ourselves, if we see that we're doing the things that will cause us to kill a church, then obviously we want to reverse that in ourselves, so that we can be sure as a member that we're doing positive things to help build a church. So that's the focus. All right. So we talked about a particular individual to begin with, and that is the accuser. And we talked about what he would do. One of the things that the accuser does is he stays in legality. He stays in the legal side of things. Now, when I'm talking legal, I'm talking about he keeps us looking from a legal perspective. That's not to say that he keeps us under the law, but he keeps us thinking legally. The Pharisees had this problem. They asked Jesus about, why his disciples went through and picked corn on the Sabbath day, why they did that, and which broke the tradition of the elders. And Jesus went to ask them, why do you make for elders your tradition? Why do you hold for tradition the doctrine of men, and such as that? Why do you hold for doctrine the traditions of men? What he's asking them is that what you've done is where you should have been studying true Bible doctrine, you've taken the traditions of men and made them your law. And so you're keeping what you think is your law, but you've abandoned God's law. You've abandoned what God's asked you to do. So today we're not under the law, but the devil kind of keeps us looking from a legal perspective to keep our minds in a particular way, so that he can cause us to think a certain way. His goal is to keep you thinking legally or traditionally, for the purpose of keeping you seeing how great of a failure you are. This is one way. Either he's going to keep you seeing how great a failure you are, so that you're constantly trying to fix yourself and earn your way, or he's going to keep you so built up in pride because you are keeping your own traditions that you lose sight of other people, just as the Pharisee and the publican. The Pharisee walked in and he was praying. Now here you have a religious man of the day. You think of it this way. The religious man of the day who walks into the temple, goes to the corner to pray, thanks God that he's not like this other man over here, when he actually should have walked over to the other man in true religion to try to help this other man. Right? Okay. So this is what the accuser does. All right, anybody know this fella? Can anybody tell you this man's name? Anybody? Somebody. I'm going to need y'all to talk a little bit tonight. Nick Saban. Everybody knows Nick Saban, right?
Didn't he used to coach Mississippi State.
He coached somewhere. He coached somewhere. He's known as the GOAT, or the greatest college football coach of all time. He's great. He's a good coach. I've always liked him. Does anybody know this guy? If you know him, don't say him. Anybody know this guy? I know you know him. Anybody else know who this guy is? There's a reason you don't know this guy. Because this guy followed that guy. This is the head coach, the previous head coach of Alabama Crimson Tide. That's the previous. I'm going the wrong way again. This is the current head coach at Alabama, Scalen DeBoer. All right? Why am I bringing this up? The reason I wanted you to see this is because it didn't matter who they named. It didn't matter who they named. I said, the poor fella that followed Nick Saban will not have a chance. He will be continually questioned. He will have to come in with a different system. He's not going to be able to run a system like Nick Saban ran his system. And there's a lot of things going to happen. I'm not going to stay in college football tonight because that's beyond the point. But you'll get the point as we move on. The point is that there was no way he could succeed. He was set up for failure. And that happens from time to time. There's other different positions. You can talk about it different times that's the case. Let's keep going. Numbers chapter 12. Verses 1 and 2, you probably know this scenario. And Miriam and Aaron spake against Moses because of the Ethiopian woman who he had married. That's their excuse, for he had married an Ethiopian woman. And they said, hath the Lord indeed spoken only by Moses? Hath he not spoken also by us? And the Lord heard it. What's the point? The point is that they used the excuse of Moses' marriage to question his ability to lead. The point, or rather, they were looking for. Let me put it this way: Miriam and Aaron were looking for an excuse to try to undermine the leadership of Moses in order to exalt themselves to the same status as Moses. Right? If you know the story of Numbers chapter 12, you know that's the case. They were trying to elevate themselves and exalt themselves to the position of Moses, but what they missed was they thought that Moses elevated himself when who elevated Moses? God. God elevated Moses to the point that he said, if there's another prophet that I'm going to speak through, I'll give him a vision or I'll send him a dream or something. But if I'm going to speak through Moses, I'll speak to Moses face to face. All right. Anybody know what happened in this story? You know the rest of the story? Miriam got leprosy. Moses had to pray for her, and they had to put her out of the camp for 7 days in order that she could be cured because of the consequence of her sin of questioning Moses. All right. What happened to Miriam and Aaron? And just answer that. Numbers chapter 16. You can turn over there if you can't see this. I realize that it's kind of small. I had to fit it on there. This is about a man named Korah and Dathan and Abiram. And verse 2 it says, and they rose up before Moses with certain of the children of Israel, 250 princes of the assembly, famous in the congregation of men of renown. And they gathered themselves together against Moses and against Aaron, and said unto them, You take too much upon you, seeing all the congregation are holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them. Wherefore then lift ye up yourselves above the congregation of the Lord. So what is Korah doing now to Moses? It's questioning his leadership, right? And that's what he's doing. Does anybody know what happened to Korah? The earth swallowed him up. The earth swallowed him up. All right. What do all of these have in common? Exactly. These are all situations where particular leaders have been questioned, and because of the questioning, they have created a very difficult and unsuccessful situation. All right? So what I want to try to talk to you about tonight as you go through, and again, I'm going to end up having to stay a little bit more in the negative because I want to do a little bit more explaining. I feel like I have to do a little bit more explaining tonight. But if you want to kill a church, regularly criticize your leaders, question your leaders, where on the other side, if you want to have a healthy church, if you want to build a good church, to grow a church, pray for and encourage your leaders. Now, there's more leaders than just a pastor. This is not a personal thing tonight, and I'm not going to take it personal. I'm not going to look at it from a personal perspective. I'm going to step back and try to remove myself from the situation completely and explain it to you unbiased. I have to talk about these things, and I have to talk about them from an unbiased standpoint, which is what I'm going to do and my best to try to do here tonight. All right, so I'm going to try to cover it completely. So what does it mean? What do you mean by questioning? That's an important part. These men, all of these men, questioned their leaders. Korah questioned Moses. Miriam and Aaron questioned Moses. I can give you another Bible one. What about Absalom? Absalom questioned David's leadership. You go to the other brother, Adonijah. Adonijah questioned Solomon. I give you maybe some more. What was it? I think it's 3 John. Diotrephes questioned John. All of these were places where they used questioning intentionally. So what do you mean by questioning? All right. So the reason this is important is because asking questions is a good thing. Asking questions is a wonderful way to learn. Asking questions is a good way to learn. A lot of people come to me with Bible questions. I don't resent that. I love that. I love to discuss the Bible. I love to talk about the Bible. I love to study the Bible. And I'm not going to stand here tonight and pretend I know everything about the Bible. There's times where people have come and asked me questions, and people have come and we've discussed things and helped me in different ways to see it maybe a different way. And there's times that people come to me because they're inquisitive and they've truly encountered a question that they're wondering the answer to, and I've had the opportunity to help them with that question. That's a good thing. Questions are good in that aspect, okay? We used to say in school that the only dumb question is the one you don't ask because you'll never know the answer to it. It's good to ask questions. This is not what's meant by questioning your leaders. All right? Consider 1 Corinthians 14:35. Turn there real quick. 1 Corinthians 14:35. I'm going to back up a couple verses for context's sake. Verse 33, 1 Corinthians 14, verse 33, "For God is not the author of confusion, but of peace, as in all the churches of the saints. Let your women keep silence in the church, for it is not permitted unto them to speak, but they are commanded to be under obedience, as also saith the law. And if they will learn anything, let them ask their husbands at home." There again, ask. I want you to notice the word ask. Ask their husbands at home, for it is a shame for a woman to speak in church. What, came the word of God out from you, or came it unto you only? All right, so what's Paul saying? Is Paul saying that it's wrong for a woman to speak in church for any circumstance, for any reason, no matter what the case is? That's a blanket statement. That's not what he's saying. You also take the next verse with it. If a woman's going to learn anything, what he says is that a woman's not to question another man at church. She's to question her husband at home. The whole point is questioning. What Paul's trying to say is that the women at Corinth were out of control. There's a reason that he wrote this to the church at Corinth. The women at Corinth were running the church. They were speaking in the church. They were, when I say speaking, they weren't giving a prayer request. They weren't talking in a specific thing. They were literally addressing the church as a congregation style. They were speaking in the church. They were questioning the leadership of the church. And so what Paul said was the only way to shut it down is that's it. Draw the line. Nobody speaks from this point forward. So how do we take that? How do you take that as a leader of the church? How do you address this? The best way that I know how to explain it is to think of, y'all remember if you've ever watched a Andy Griffith show, you know about Barney, right? Barney, y'all, let me just put it to you this way. Y'all remember the day that Andy had to go to Raleigh, I believe it was, I don't remember the circumstances, and he left Barney in charge for one day, and he comes back and the town's quiet and everything's quiet. He was like, man, I can't believe it. Barney actually did a good job. And he walks in the door of the sheriff's office and everybody is in jail. Y'all remember that one? Yeah. If we're not careful, that's what we'll do with this verse. There are times where this verse is intended to be used, and the times where this point in this verse is intended to be used is when a woman has overstepped her authority. So is it wrong for a woman to speak? No. Is it wrong for a woman to ask of a particular question of another man? No. But when it gets to a point when it's out of control, then at a point you got to say that's enough, that the women are trying to control and steer the direction of the church, and they're not asking questions for the intention of learning. They're asking questions for the intention of using their influence to cause problems within the church. That's why Paul made the statement over in Timothy and Titus to not gender questions of strifes and genealogies, because they just cause problems. Does that make sense? So what Paul's telling us again is to use this to the point that we don't let things get out of control, and that there's a time and a way to use this in a way of discretion. So if a woman has a prayer request, is that a problem? No. If a woman makes a statement in silence or in conference, let me say it that way, I don't have a problem with a woman speaking in conference, because there's sometimes that a woman has the information that we need, and if she won't speak, we can't get to the next, we can't move on. So no. But when a woman uses her voice for the intention of usurping authority over a man, then now we've got problems. Now we've got issues, and that's going to make a lot more sense as we move forward. By implication is that the implication rather that Paul's making is that the question were intentional to cause strife. We all know what that means. That the question is not a legitimate question. It's not I'm trying to figure out the answer to it. It's that I'm trying to cause a problem. And what Paul's saying is that in that case, a woman needs to be quiet and go home and talk to her husband. All right. This is disrupt the peace of the church. That's what was happening. They were disrupting the peace of the church. So I ask you this question: if you are asking a question, not just of me, if you're asking a question in Sunday school, if you're asking a question of another man at the church, are you asking that question to learn or to prove a point? Because if you're asking that question to prove a point, you're out of line. And I'm going to show that even more as we go on. And the best way I can describe this is think of the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law. Because we stick with the spirit of the law. And the letter of the law gets you in trouble, but the spirit of the law is that things be done in order and they be done decently. In fact, we're looking at 1 Corinthians 14, verse 35, right? And look at verse 40. If you want to see context, verse 40 says, let all things done decently and in order. All right. So to question, this is the definition. To question is inclined to ask questions, to seek information. That's the most basic definition of the word question. That's what we think of. We are asking a question, and I'm asking a question for one purpose. It's because you have information and I want that information. I ask you the question, you give me the information. Pretty straightforward. And then there's the other definition of question, that is the raising of doubt surrounding an individual or a person. In other words, you're not asking a question for your seeking information. You're asking a question to raise doubt around the individual. That's what Korah did to Moses. That's what Miriam did to Moses. That's what is unfortunately happening to Kalen DeBar right now, because he's being questioned in every way whether or not he has the ability to continue to coach football at Alabama. And he'll continue to be questioned, all right, because he's not Nick Saban. All right. Let's go. Look at the accuser for a moment. This is where it's going to all begin to come together. Look at the accuser for a moment. He uses legality or traditions to entice someone to question their leadership. Again, the accuser uses legality or traditions to entice someone to question his leadership. Now, the name accuser, what does that depict Satan as? When Satan's called the accuser, he's called, that's Revelation chapter 12, I think my memory serves me right, he's called the accuser of the brethren. We see him in Zechariah chapter 3 standing as a district attorney who's raising accusations against Joshua, the high priest at the time. So we said look at the devil like a lawyer, right? If you put somebody on the stand, what does the district attorney begin to do? What's he doing? Asking questions, right? The lawyer's job is to ask questions. If the lawyer begins to talk, what happens? Objection. Counsel's testifying. You can't testify, you can only ask questions. What does the devil do? He acts like a lawyer in a courtroom. He asks questions. He questions an individual in a specific way to undermine them and to cause doubt. And if we're not very careful, the devil will use us to do the exact same thing. This is questioning in a wrong form. This is questioning leadership in a way that causes great issues. Is there a time and purpose for it? Yes. I'll talk about that in a moment. Is it always good? No. It can bring a lot of problems. Can anybody think of an example where the devil acted as a lawyer and questioned somebody in order to throw doubt upon the leadership? How about, what did God tell you concerning the trees of the garden? He caused a question to throw shade upon the Lord and cause Adam and Eve to question his leadership. And how many times do we see church members do church leaders the same way and lead parts of the membership astray? And who backed that? Who accomplished that? The accuser of the brethren. All right. So what is the result? And this is what I'm going to give you. We're going to look at kind of a results. This is kind of what happens when we question our leadership. And the last thing I want to get to is, what do we do? How do we fix it if we find that problem in ourselves? So what is the result? What happens with Christian leadership? Number one, it draws lines among people. It draws lines among people. I've heard a lot, and sometimes, I want to tell you, things begin to happen. Our first instincts start drawing lines. And the moment a line is drawn, what do you have? A division. There's no division as long as you don't draw a line. But the moment a line is drawn, then we're starting to divide. And we're siding with so-and-so. We're already beginning to make sides. One of the things that questioning leadership does is it draws lines. I'm not on his side. And you're making that very clear by your question. That's what Korah did. How many people did Korah have on his side? I know he had 250. The Bible tells us that, plus Dathan, plus Abram. But he had 250. Could have had more, but he divided part of it. How many did the devil get on his side? And with his tail, he drew a third of the stars of heaven, right? So he drew a third of the angels by bringing in division, causing questions. So he's drawing lines. First thing that questioning leadership does is it draws lines and it brings people in the camp. And the people that do this intentionally for this purpose. They're trying to drag power behind them. I've heard everything as pastor. One of the things that I heard is that, we got an argument. We got the situation where this was the case, and we're having to try to work this out as a church. And one of the statements that was made from the other side is, we can't do anything. Y'all got all the votes. I said, what is we and y'all? Who drew the lines? But it's you have the power, or if we had enough power, we'd do it differently. Y'all have the votes. We don't have the ability. It divides the camp into at least two sides. And so leadership, or questioning leadership, always brings division. Questioning leadership will always bring division every time. All right, next. Questioning leadership always creates a toxic environment. It creates a toxic environment. You're not going to be able to see this. I'm going to read it to you real quick. If you need a copy of this, I can get it to you. But what a toxic environment is an environment that with a lack of respect, an environment with poor communication, an environment of gossip and backstabbing, an environment of micromanagement and control, an environment of unrealistic expectations, and an environment of a lack of accountability, abusive supervision, unfair treatment, high stress, and burnout. If any of that sounds familiar, then that's a toxic environment. And that is an environment where things cannot thrive. They're going to die because it's sucking the life out of it. All right? So many relationships end up in toxic environments because there's so many questions surrounded and there's no faith. There's no trust. And so, again, one of the things that questioning does is it destroys faith. There's no trust in the system. All right? So, again, last result, one of the results of questioning, what happens with question, it undermines the ability to accomplish any headway. You'll never move forward as long as there's questions concerning the leadership until the church unites, or whatever, if you want to call it church, if you want to look at this is just a biblical principle. If you want to look at it as whatever, until there's unification in leadership, it'll never make it. This is one thing that kind of, as I studied, you find these principles all the time laid out in the world, in society. Look at college football. Look at NFL football. The team, or let's say it this way, the talent that separates one team from another team in NFL football is like that. The team that wins the Super Bowl is a team that was able to unify themselves. Whoever accomplishes this the best is going to win. Whoever will unify under their leadership. If a coach can't get his team to unify, then they're not going to make any headway. If a pastor and the leaders of a church cannot get the church to unify themselves under a common goal, it will fail. There's no question about that. It must be unified under the leadership of the church, or rather under under that specific leadership. All right. This is typically the point. And again, what I mean by this is, if you're questioning it, that's the point, is to raise questions, to cause division. People that are usually questioning leadership don't even realize, that's why I put intentional or unintentional, because most times it's unintentional. They don't even realize what they're doing, but they're bringing in questions. They're constantly questioning the leadership, and all it's doing is undermining any headway that the church will ever make, and it's going to continue to cause problems. It's going to continue to undermine any success until this situation is dealt with. And so that's the way it works. It creates an atmosphere where success is impossible. Go back to Caleb and DeBoer. It creates an atmosphere where success is impossible. It will never be accomplished until... Why is that? Why is this so important to a church? Because what you usually see happen with a church is a pastor is extremely respected and he leaves. And who comes behind him? Doesn't matter. But if he can't put the church together and they unite under the leadership that God put there, they'll fail. That's not a question. That'll happen every time. You can put any church you want to in that box or in that place. That's going to happen every time. If the church can't unite under the leadership, now this is all with an assumption, and I'm going to give you that assumption. This is all with the assumption that the church called the right man and the man gave the right answer and God is in his leadership. All right? This is all assuming this to be the case. If that's the case as a church, then it doesn't matter as far as the little pictures of, well, he disagrees with me on this point or he disagrees on that point. If it's not a doctrinal issue and you ain't got a reason to silence him, you better get behind him. All right, so it creates an atmosphere where success is impossible. So what do we do? What should we do? This is individually. What do we do? If I've got a man that's my pastor, that I'm looking at this situation, he's my pastor, and I'm not sure about his leadership. What do I do in this situation? One, I address the doubt. I begin to search within my own heart. I begin to pray, talk to the Lord, and to seek understanding of why I have this doubt concerning his leadership. Why is it that I think this man is incapable of maybe doing what somebody else has been capable of doing? Why is it that I'm doubting this man's ability to lead? Why was it that Moses was questioned, or rather Aaron and Miriam were questioning Moses? Why was it that Korah was questioning Moses? Why is it that Absalom was questioning David? Why is it that Diotrephes was questioning John? You go back and look at all of those examples and you can begin to see that. So you have to search within your own heart and say, where is this doubt arising from? Seek God's will. That's important. Again, go back. Ask yourself, is this what God wanted? Did God put this together? How can I know that? What do I see concerning that? And let me tell you this, if you see that and you say, yes, this is clear that it's God's will, then again, lest you stand against God, you get behind the man, right? And then trust the Lord. Trust the Lord that he knew what he was doing by putting a particular man in a particular place at a particular time. Every man, let me put it to you this way, every man has his gift. Every man has a certain way that he feels led of the Lord to lead. I have a way that I feel led of the Lord to lead. It's by years of experience and searching hard, talking to the Lord. Is it different than other men? Yes. Is it the same as some men? Yes, it is. Yeah, it's different than some. Which one's right? Well, God put me here at this time, but he put them somewhere else at another time, so it depends on the scenario. It depends on the situation. What's my job? My job is to trust the Lord and to follow his direction and to lead the entire church behind the direction of the Lord. All right, so we have to trust the Lord together that he put the leaders together with the church for the cause of moving forward. Now, this is if a leadership has a doctrinal issue or if the leader has done something in his life that he's not qualified anymore, that's a whole different topic. Right? That's a position where now we've got to do something about this because now the leader is in question by his life and by the doctrinal issue. All right, continue moving forward. So what else do we do? The next thing that we need to do is we need to pray that the truth could be revealed. Again, if we have a place of disagreement where the leader sees one way and there's a section of the church that sees things another way, and they've made strides to get it together, but they can't, then you need to pray on both sides, seek the truth, and that the truth could be revealed, and that God's will could be understood. If both sides will do this with a pure and honest heart, God will answer that prayer, and the church can be unified. By the way, you can't pray that with a sincere prayer if you're not willing to admit that you're wrong and adjust your stance. So what does that mean? That means you have to go in there with an honest and sincere heart and say, if the Lord shows me different, I'll be willing to change. And I'll be willing to do things different if the Lord will show me different. That's a question of the heart. We've got to be willing to pray sincerely and seek God's will above even what we want to see in our own desires for the church. Lastly, what else do? We stay away from those who display the characteristics of a schismatic. So in other words, it may not be you questioning yourself, it could be somebody else questioning, and you see that in their life, you see that continuing to happen in your life, or you see this individual who's intentionally bringing up questions, and they're going around to different individuals, and they're questioning the leadership of the church intentionally. What do you do in that situation? You stay away from them. That's not Trent Williamson's words. They're showing the character, and they're displaying the character of the accuser. Whose character is, who is that? Who's the accuser? Satan. They're displaying the character of Satan. Romans chapter 16 and verse 17 and 18 makes a statement that you mark them which cause division among you and avoid them. Stay away from them. Titus chapter 3 verses 9 through 11 talks about a schismatic or a heretic, one who intentionally causes. Let me just turn over here and read it. Turn to Titus chapter 3 real quick. Titus chapter 3, if you want to turn and read. There's some good stuff over there. There's a reason I want to turn and read, just in the context in Titus chapter 3. Verse 9 it says, but avoid foolish questions and genealogies and contentions and strivings about the law, for they are unprofitable and vain. The very next verse makes a statement that if a man that is an heretic or schismatic, after the first and second admonition reject. In other words, and a lot of people go to a damnable heresy on this because it calls him a heretic. I think what Paul's saying is that if you've got an individual in the church that is intentionally questioning the leadership and he's trying to undermine the leadership of the church, if you go to him twice and he won't adjust his behavior, you remove his fellowship. I believe that's what Paul's trying to say here because it comes right in the context. And if you look at the word heretic, it's the word schismatic, which is one who intentionally causes division. Verse 11, knowing that he that is such is subverted and sinneth, being condemned of himself. In other words, by his own character. All right? So, what's that saying? One, you stay away from them. You see their character. Don't let them drag you into a bad situation. You see what they're doing, and you mark those which intentionally and continually cause division among you, and stay away from them. All right, the accuser. The accuser is the one who uses questions to sling accusations. The devil uses questions to sling accusations. What did the devil accuse Job of? Does Job serve the Lord for naught? It's a question, right? Question after question after question. That's what he does, is ask questions. He is the questioner, right? And his whole intention is to undermine leadership, to undermine authority, and to ultimately undermine the truth, and to undermine God's word. And he used the Pharisees time and time again by their traditions to do that, because they elevated their traditions and they put down and they lowered the degree to which they followed the word of God. Verse 23, Matthew 23, he made that very clear, that he said that you pay tithes of mint and anise and cumin, but you've left off the weightier matters of the law. Your legal system has become more important to you than what God truly says in your relationship with the Lord. All right. So he used them time and time again. The accuser is the one who questions. He uses questions rather to sling accusation. He is the questioner, and don't let him use you to accomplish his purpose. All right? Any questions? Like I did that, didn't you? No, seriously, anybody got any questions? All right. I want to reiterate again, is there time to question your leaders? Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's where you be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. So you be very careful in what you're doing. And you be very careful in standing for the truth. But there is a time for it, and there is a purpose for it. But if you're on the page and you know that the Lord has put these things together, and you know that the differences between you and where the leader stands is negligible, that's not a doctrinal issue, in other words, then trust that God is leading that man. Pray for the leader, okay? Pray for him, because I'm going to tell you, church leaders are not perfect. We make errors. There are times I can look back over the ministry that God's given me, and I've made mistakes. There are times that if I could go back now and do some things at that time with the knowledge and information that I know now, I would have done a different thing in a different way, and probably could have had a little bit more success at that time than now. But I can't go back. But I do need your prayers. I'm not perfect. Other leaders of the church, your Sunday school teachers, they're not perfect. The song leaders, they're not perfect. None of us are perfect. And rather than questioning leaders and trying to undermine the integrity and structure of the church, pray for this church. Try to come to an agreement and a way to work. All right. Any questions? If not, then is there any announcements or anything?